we've got an hour to cover a subject that we could perhaps spend multiple hours talking about. So we're going to try and make sure you get lots of information, which means I'll go relatively quickly. And also I'll mention that based on your feedback at the end with survey questions that we'll be sending you, or you may have filled out when you were registering, we'll be interested to learn about other subjects you might want to cover in future events. So let's get right to it and start off by saying what the agenda is. We're going to focus in on generating more qualified sales leads, the proven strategies, tactics, as well as where to get started if you haven't got anything going at the moment or you need to rev things up at the moment, and also some discussion of resources to help you get the job done at the end, because it's all well and good to say here's what you need to do, but it sure is sometimes helpful to know how to get it done. So I've included some of that as well. And where we'll start off is talking about the cost of a business-to-business sales call. Now, this research was done by Connors Research in 2001, and the first thing you're thinking is, boy, this is old stuff. It is. However, there has been no current research. It seems that all the publishing companies and advertising agencies that were doing a lot of research back in the early 2000s are now have cut their budgets and aren't doing as much of that stuff. So wouldn't you assume that costs may be higher now than they were at that time? But what we're really saying here is that the average cost of a sales call back in 2001 was about $329. I expect that's significantly higher today. Now, depending on the industry, as you can see, there's a number of industries listed. Depending on your industry, the cost may be slightly higher or slightly lower, but let's just use that average number for a moment and keep that in mind as we get to the next couple of slides here. How many sales calls does it take to close a business-to-business sale if sales is doing it all by themselves? And the same research showed that that was a little more than 5 on average. The good news, if you sell into the building and construction industry, it might be a little bit less. But, for example, knowing the folks who are on the phone here today, manufacturing, well, some of you are selling computer-related hardware and software and services, so your clients may vary. But I think one of you is with specialized metal cutting equipment, and you're probably selling into the manufacturing industry, so potentially less sales calls are required, which is good news for you. But keeping that in mind, those average numbers of, let's go to the next slide here and do a little bit of math. 5 sales calls at $329 each is about $1,645. Now, meanwhile, if you could replace some of those sales calls with marketing contacts, let's just pick a number, $10 a touch, 12 times, or once a month for a whole year, you might spend $120, which might replace 2 of those sales calls, which we'll show you which ones in a moment. And if you then add 3 sales calls for your salespeople to make, what happens is you wind up with a total savings of about $538, which, interestingly enough, also results in your salespeople being more efficient because they're not having to make 2 out of 5 calls, and also your company is getting a higher ROI overall because they've lowered their costs to get the same kind of results. So if that math makes sense, here's how to apply it. Here are the various steps in the sales process. Arguably, there's 6: prospecting, nurturing, qualifying, demoing, proposing, and closing. And now you could argue that there's also, cementing the sale and reselling and all those, but in getting the first sale, these are probably pretty indicative of the first 6 steps. What I'm recommending as a strategy for building business at your company and as a justification for the marketing programs that you're putting together is that we use lower cost one-to-many marketing communications tactics to do the prospecting, qualifying, and nurturing phases of the sales process. And then that frees up our salespeople to really focus on what they do best, which is demoing, proposing, and closing. And again, if you were to use that mathematical example I walked you through, often they're more efficient and your ROI is higher, which is a huge justification for why your company should be investing some money in lead generation. Now, a side issue that applies to a number of you in the group is there was a research study done by Marketing Sherpa. They researched 80,000 of their subscribers as well as compiling research from other third-party sources. What they discovered was that although technology firms, companies that are selling technology-related products and services are spending about 3.8% of their budget, and that compares to 11% being spent on sales, they're ultimately responsible for bringing in 60% of the new business. In other words, marketing, 3.8% of the budget, is responsible for bringing in 60% of the business. So we got a lot of work to do, and that's a good part of what today is all about, is how to be more effective at generating leads that can be passed on to your sales organization as qualified leads. So let me start out with the other sort of strategic direction. Your success depends on making four rights, so to speak, with your marketing when you're trying to generate leads. One is targeting the right prospects. Two is making the right offers or calls to action to get them to raise their hand and engage with you. Three is using the right media. In other words, the right communications tactic to get that message through, whether that be things like advertising, direct mail, email, telemarketing, etc., billboards on the freeway, but using the right media. And then fourth is being there at the right time. Now, if I was asked which of these are most important, I would say it's the right prospect, the right offers, and the right time are more important than anything else. So if you're there when they're having a problem or thinking about a need or making a change or upgrading or buying something new to replace something that's not running very well, that's half the battle. The other half of the battle is the right offer to engage them and aimed at the right prospect. Let's drill into this a little bit and turn them into some tips that you can use to market them. What are these 19 tips that have been proven by business-to-business marketers to be effective in maximizing the number of leads from the activities? Well, the first one we already mentioned, which is aiming at the right prospects. And there are two kinds of prospects that you want to consider as your most important. One is those that are similar to your best customers, the ones that really are in the same kind of industry, same areas, have the same problems, same kind of decision makers. It's really taking a look at them and determining where are they located and how big or small are they, and who were the decision makers and what were their industries or applications. Why specifically did they choose your company over the competition, and which are willing to give you quotes or testimonials? Because it's really much easier to market and sell when you can leverage quotes and testimonials from happy customers. Because candidly, our prospects think when we're telling them we're great that we're bragging or selling. But when one of their peers, your testimonial, says, hey, these guys really are great, they believe it. It has quite an impact, and we'll talk about that a bit later on here. So that's the first group of prospects that you should be aiming at. The second is market niches that represent the best potential for you, whether those be horizontal like geography. One of my clients in Southern California, for example, focuses on a national and international basis on certain vertical industries, but locally they focus on a 1-hour circle from their location to try to encourage small and medium-sized business in their area to engage their services. So they really focus on a geographic niche as well as a vertical niche, going after particular kinds of companies, primarily manufacturers, in a certain kind of manufacturing across the country. In addition to that, they then have profiled, as I said earlier, some of their best customers and have gone back and added additional prospects from those industries to their databases to also market to. So they kind of have three mini campaigns going on all at once: a geographic niche, a vertical niche, as well as a niche of a subset of the database that are very similar to their best customers now. Number two, and I mentioned this one in those sort of four rights, is be there when they're thinking about their problem. In other words, be there at the right time. It's better to reach out and touch, let's say, 1,000 or even 500 prospects every single month with your marketing activities, rather than talking to 12 times that many only once a year. Basically, asking somebody to marry you on the first date generally doesn't work in our human relationships, and it doesn't work in our direct marketing relationships very well either. So if you can find a way to reach out and touch a group of prospective customers on an ongoing basis as frequently as possible without being so frequent that you're annoying them, and that could be a whole other seminar, but I'd say once a month is about right without annoying folks, then you can continue to market to them until they have a need for your product or service. The other point is that you want to give them, prospects and potential referrers, something that stays in front of them, something that they'll see every day. So look around your desktop. Are there various things that you touch or use every day that have been given to you as an ad specialty from somebody else? On my desk, I have a paperweight. I've got a Post-it note dispenser. I've got a rear view mirror on my monitor that lets me see if somebody's sneaking up behind me when I'm hard at work. I have what else do I have? I have one of those little clips that holds paper standing straight up. And honestly, I see those companies' names, and I'm reminded that they're there to provide services to me or sell me products every day. So if you can think of some materials that you can get on people's desks, whether it's a calendar or whatever, or maybe in their car. You know, if you sell into the construction industry, your client's office might be their pickup truck. And if you can get something that sits on the dashboard of their car, like in my car, somebody gave me a sticky pad that holds my cell phone from sliding around and my sunglasses from sliding around, and it has a logo on it, and every time I'm in my car, I think of that company. So some way to not only reach out and touch them with your marketing messages, but also to stay in sight and in mind so that when they have a problem or they have a need, you're the handiest. You're right there. The next point, number 5 out of the tips we're giving today, are get right to the point. In other words, don't expect the reader to figure it out. Don't get too cute, too clever. I saw an ad a while back in an electronics magazine that showed gold-plated golf clubs and a gold-plated golf bag. I'm sitting on a beautifully manicured, golf green, and it had this message, with all these golf metaphors in it about when you're driving for success and this and that. Well, long story short, I can't tell what that company's selling. Are they selling golf clubs and golf equipment that's been gold-plated? Are they selling plating equipment? Are they selling something else? They assumed, I guess, that I would know them. Well, honestly, I do a lot of work in the electronics industry. I'm pretty up to date on who's who in that business, and I didn't have a clue who they were, and it was very difficult from their ad to tell what they were all about. So that was a big waste of money, in my opinion. Secondly, is you want to avoid telling them something they already know. And I realized it was raining a lot in parts of the country this year, and brings an analogy to mind of, you're sitting on the roof of your house and water is up to the eaves, and you're shivering with your spouse and your kids and your pets and waiting to be rescued. And the rescue boat rows up, and they say, hey, I bet you're cold. I bet you're wet. I bet you'd like to be rescued. And you're thinking to yourself, shut up already and just rescue us. We already know we're cold and wet and waiting to be rescued. That's what I mean. A lot of our marketing, the first 2 paragraphs are setting the scene that they're already well aware of. We need to get right to the point and point that out to them without beating around the bush. Now, while we're communicating that message, point 6 is we need to talk to all parts of the brain. For example, I'm a visual person, so you're most effectively communicating to me with pictures or images, or word images, meaning if you describe something, I'm seeing it in my mind. In fact, I do that so much that when I'm sitting across from a client and they're telling me something that I'm picturing at the moment, I'm sort of glancing up into the sky over their head or off to one side, picturing what they're telling me. And they're often like craning their necks to see what I'm looking at. And I have to explain that, no, I'm not looking at anything. I'm just sort of picturing what they're describing. Now, meanwhile, my wife, just as an example, who's a business professional as well, she does best dealing with words, either in writing or spoken, but I'll go chasing her around the house with a laptop trying to show her something, and she'll be saying, can't you see I'm busy? Don't show me, just tell me, because that's how she processes information best. And then all of us know people that are emotional, that process information through their feelings. If you say, what a nice outfit, they say, oh, this old thing, and they kind of stare at their shoes. Or if you don't say good morning to them when you walk by their office or cubicle this morning, they wonder if you're mad at them. Well, same thing with the people reading your advertising and direct mail and all the rest, your websites and your trade show exhibits as they're strolling by. Some of them are reading the words, some are being communicated to through the messages, and then if you can cement it with emotions. So, for example, imagine doing a direct mailing that in the headline talks about Finally, being able to take a vacation and not worry about your department running efficiently. And if it had a picture of somebody with a beach umbrella and a Mai Tai or a pina colada sitting on the little table next to them, looking out over the ocean, you're now appealing to the emotion as well as the imagery to the people that process the image best, as well as the words in the headline that are talking about finally being able to take a vacation because everything's running smoothly. Now, if you can weave all three of those into your messages and your direct marketing and your advertising, you will have much more success at connecting with those prospective customers and getting them to respond. The seventh point is answering the most important question ever. What's in it for me? We so often are describing all the things that we do, and we're not communicating the benefits of those. In other words, we're not communicating how it will solve their problems, save them money, get them home earlier to their family at night. So give some thought to answering that question by focusing on the benefits, not just the features, as well as using things like before and after imagery to let the visuals of the world see the impact that your product or service can have on them, because that's communicating visually again to those folks. Moving on. Number 8, talk second person. What do I mean by that? I mean, try to use the words like you and your as much as possible. Write it from that point of view, so it's like a conversation. And follow with we and our, but don't lead with we and our. So, for example, you could say on your website, if you're looking for the best metal cutting technology today, you've come to the right place. Then go on and say, we're a great metal cutting technology company, or using plasma cutting, or we're the IT specialists who are gold certified and can help you get enterprise level IT services without having to spend big company money to get it. So really do focus on the you and your. A friend of mine, Bob Bly, who's one of the top business-to-business copywriters, says a good direct mail letter has 7 U's, and a great direct mail letter has even more. So the moral of the story is stop wee-wee-weeing all over yourself with your advertising copy and start youing instead. I think you'll have a lot more success at catching their attention and getting them to be responsive to your offers. That leads to the other way of saying you is doing it personally. So number 9 is personalize whenever possible, whether that be by their name or whether it be by their job function, others in your job function, and you name it. Other CFOs have found that, or other operations directors have found that. By industry, other manufacturing companies, small manufacturing companies, maybe even being more specific, companies that are having to deal with security of their customer records, that could be by application. And then try to weave those kinds of personalizations into all of your communications, whether they be letters, emails, brochures, but also personalized URLs. Imagine you get a direct mailing and it has a link in it, or an email for that matter, that has a link in it to a URL that's xyzcompany.com / and it's your name. In other words, saying / Bev O'Reilly or Angie Harada or Andy Retzel. Those kinds of personalized URLs are getting huge response from my clients, much more click-through rates, because people are curious to see what's out there that has their name in it. So, Kim and Luciano, consider using that technique. It really works well. So let's move on. Make it easy to skim. Now, kind of a trick question that I ask in my live seminars when I'm sitting in front of a classroom is, how many of you think that a long letter is better versus a short letter? And it's really a trick question, because the honest answer, the best answer, is a long letter that's skimmable. Why? Because those that just want to skim it and get the short answer can do so. But those that need all the details in order to know that this is something that they should take a next step on will have that as well. So the best recommendation is use long copy, but make it skimmable. Lots of things like, headlines, sub-headlines, bullet points, captions on photos or illustrations, underlines, all sorts of things you can do to draw attention to key points so they don't have to read every page of it. But if they're one of those folks, and there's many of them out there that need more detail before they're going to, take 3 hours out of their busy day to come to your seminar, you need to spend more time explaining all the benefits of attending and all the things they'll learn and take home, and then you'll have much better registration. Next, number 11, choose your words carefully. What do I mean by that? Well, instead of saying ask for a brochure, you offer a decision-maker kit or a how-to guide or a white paper on a particular subject as part of what your offer is, something that sounds useful and helpful and relevant to them rather than something that sounds like sales literature. That alone will increase your response. For example, one of my clients in the data warehousing business, one of my computer services clients, they did a white paper called Data Warehousing. And nobody downloaded it. Nobody wanted it. So I read it, and it was really quite good. And there were basically 5 major tips in that data warehousing white paper. And what they really were was 5 major mistakes that companies make and how to avoid them. So we used that as a title. We said, data warehousing, 5 mistakes most people make and how you can avoid them. And suddenly they had dozens of people a day downloading this white paper that previously nobody was interested in. And it was just the words, the titling. So you need to have a sexy title that sounds like there's a benefit of asking for that information. By all means, make sure they know it's free, but be very careful of the word free in email subject lines. We might be able to do a later webinar on email and how to get your email delivered. And one of the tricks is not to use words like free in the subject line because the spam filters are looking for words like that to block email. Also, words like new or introducing or the latest. People want to be up to date on what's happening in their industry and their business and the products and services that they're buying. So it goes a long way towards getting their attention and their interest and getting them to respond. But a little word of warning, avoid cliches. Things like state-of-the-art, cutting edge, leading, those are all hollow promises today because everybody says them. If I did a show of hands with you folks, how many of you say, hey, we're second rate? I don't think that happens much. I think we all say we're great, and we all say we have great customers, and our customers say, hey, they're pretty good. We need to find a way to differentiate ourselves, and one way is to use plain English rather than cliches. And if you are making a claim like leading, you need to be able to support that with proof of some kind. And, such as we were voted number 1 by or chosen by 9 out of 10 of the Fortune 1000, or voted number 1 by the industry association, or our customer satisfaction rating is 4.8 out of a possible 5, or 99% uptime verified by an independent organization. Those kinds of things really get people's attention because now it's believable. Well, I mentioned earlier the power of testimonials, having one of your clients say, these guys are really great. But the real key to testimonials is to use real people at real companies. In other words, if you say something in quotation marks in a headline, but don't attribute it to who it is, it's not believable. And if you say something like Fortune 1000 companies, chief operating officer, it's also somewhat not believable because, hey, they could have made that up. But if you literally have the name of the company or the name, better yet, the name of the person in their title, now it's really believable. And many people are more than happy to give you testimonials. Some big, large companies have policies against it, but that's rare. Typically, the individuals will give you permission, especially if they're happy with you. Now, if they're not happy with you, they're not going to be a testimonial. If they're not happy with your products or services, they won't. But if they are happy customers, those are the ones to ask, and often they comply or are happy to help. Let's talk about tip number 13. Make offers, or in other words, calls to action that your prospects can't or won't refuse. Things like educational offers, how-to sort of stuff we talked about. Useful offers, checklists, evaluation guides, free tools. For example, one of my clients sells the same data storage company I mentioned before. They sell a sort of a data storage service, and they have created a little guide of all the file extensions in the country I mean, in the world of technology or computers, and I'm looking at it as we're speaking, and they call it an information management glossary, and they list all of the terms and as well as all of the file extensions so that when some network administrator is looking at certain files and saying, are these ones we need to archive or not, they can quickly look it up and say, oh, I see, those are Microsoft Publisher files, or those are, Quark files, or whatever the case may be, and know what those extensions are. But who else would want that except somebody who's having to deal with, storing and sorting and managing information? So it's sort of a self-qualifying offer. In other words, only people that would need it would be interested. And other kinds of self-qualifying offers might be seminars or demos or workshops, because who's going to take the time to spend 2 or 3 hours to drive to your event, sit in the chair for a couple of hours or all day for that matter, and unless they're really somewhat interested in what your subject is. So those also could be self-qualifying offers. Now, while we're at it, making those offers, we should be making multiple offers. That's point number 14, that they can request, for example, request your free decision maker kit, or sign up for our 3 biggest mistakes and how to avoid them web seminar, or arrange for a free on-site assessment, or whatever language you want to use, whether it's free or low cost, or just you're offering the on-site assessment. Basically, what we did is we offered them 3 different reasons that they might say yes, which will effectively triple the number of inquiries you get. I'd like to show you an example of that. This is one of my clients, a company that sells television advertising in the automotive industry. So it's a business-to-business sale. They're selling other marketers on advertising on their television programs. And they recently did a mailing, and this was the reply card that went out with the mailing, that they could offer, again, this free white paper. Notice the title, The 10 Biggest Mistakes Automotive Marketers Make in Planning Media and Producing Advertising and How to Avoid Them. Guess where they got the idea? They got it from me. They want to schedule a free phone consultation that was offered in the letter with a media specialist, ask for a DVD press kit or media kit, and fourth, which is sort of a soft offer, is I'm not interested right now, but definitely keep me on the list because I may be interested in the future. And this has really worked well for them. Different people respond to different things, and some people check all of the boxes and they'll send them everything, but it really increases the number of responses they get. So what you really want to do is have offers that appeal to people at different stages of the sales cycle. So if it's early, if you think of a dating analogy, what's like meeting for coffee or a first date? It's something that doesn't take a big commitment on their part. In this case, it could be an info kit or a how-to guide or a white paper. In the middle, where they're, you've been dating a while, and they're, maybe it's going out to dinner at a really nice restaurant on Wednesday night. That might be like coming to a 1-hour web seminar, or, downloading a decision tool and filling out the checklist and that kind of thing. Later, as they're sort of ready in the dating analogy, when they're more ready to consider a marriage proposal, then they're interested in needs assessments, quotations, and meeting with the salesperson, that kind of thing. So what you really want to do is make multiple offers that span the various stages of the buying or consideration process so that you can get them to raise their hand and start engaging with them. Now, some of them may not be qualified as sales-ready leads, but now you have the opportunity to nurture them, which we'll talk about in a minute, and until they are sales-ready and get a lot more leads into the pipeline. So point number 16, make it easy to respond. Now, did we really expect a lot of people to return that reply form in the envelope on that mailing with the automotive marketer? No, we expected that they would go to the website, they would email, they would pick up the phone. But just by putting the reply form in there, they have found that their overall response rate has gone up significantly. It's a reminder to people of what the offers are. And by the way, a couple of people did return it, which might have been inquiries they wouldn't have gotten otherwise. It's easy for the customer, easy for the prospective customer. So consider every single piece of marketing you do, marketing communications, if it's designed to generate leads, having things like phone numbers, your email address, your fax number. Your fax number? Yeah, it's easy for them to hand this to an administrative assistant or walk over to the fax machine and just shove it through it, and they're done. They made their inquiry. And it's quick. They expect you got it right away. Or if they mail it, they may think it'll take a week to get to you. So definitely give that some consideration. So let's move on a little bit. Let's talk about giving them a compelling reason to respond now, number 17. Now, I'm sure you've all been sitting on the couch late at night and have seen the infomercials where they say things like, wait, there's more. If you order now, we'll also throw in, the Ginsu knife or a second bottle for absolutely free. What they're trying to do is get you off your butt and on the phone because they know you're not going to say, well, I'll think about it and call them in the morning, because by the time morning comes, you've long since forgotten all about it. So what can you offer in your lead generation marketing that will get them to respond now? Respond before this particular date and you'll get this for free or this extra. Limited number offers. Be one of the first 20 to sign up and you'll get this tool or this discount or this free value-added service. Those are the kinds of things that can get people to act on it right now. I think of my desk as having a pile of good intentions. When I'm sorting my mail, or for that matter, my email, I'm quickly deciding, this is something I need to deal with right now. Or good news, it's a check. Or bad news, it's a bill. But I'm trying to sort through quickly, and I have this pile on the corner of my desk I call my pile of good intentions. This is interesting, but I'm too busy to deal with it right now. So I'm going to put it in that pile, and I'll look at it later. Well, you know what happens? That pile gets taller and taller, and about once a month, I sort of skim through the bottom of the pile and realize if I lived without it this long, I probably don't need it, and I throw it out, and I start over again. So if it gets in that pile of good intentions, the odds are nothing will happen to it. But if you make me a compelling time-limited offer, I might decide that maybe I should inquire right now because otherwise I won't be able to take advantage of this special price or this special offer, and I will act on it right away. An example of that is recently I was thinking about buying that software you may have heard of called Dragon Naturally Speaking, where you can dictate into the computer rather than having to type everything. And if you saw how I type, you might understand why I'm interested. Well, I've been thinking about it for 6 months, but suddenly I got an offer by email where if I bought now, it was $99 instead of $199, a special offer that I decided this is the time to do it because that's a much better price. One of the reasons I hadn't bought it yet was at $199, even though that might be a value, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to spend a lot of money and then find out that it wasn't that useful to me. But at $99, it became a no-brainer decision. Go ahead and try it. If it doesn't work well, oh well, I wasted $99. But in addition, they had a money-back guarantee. So once I get it installed, which I haven't done yet, and I try it, if it's not useful, within 30 days I can say, you know what, not for me, and they will cheerfully refund my credit card for the purchase, and I'll send it back to them. But they got me to take an action with a limited time offer. So that leads us to point number 18, which is nurture your longer term leads. And one of the points is that a lot of your leads represent sales that aren't ready yet. In other words, they represent 3 out of 4 sales that you would get from those leads if only you were following up with and nurturing those longer-term leads. 3 out of 4. In other words, instead of getting 1 lead per 100, you're getting 4 leads per 100. So it's definitely worth considering putting together lead nurturing programs, which I'll touch on in a moment. And I see that Rafael has a question here, which I would like to answer before I get too far along. We don't feel that sales leads sent to our channel partners, in other words, through distribution, are followed up, or better yet, we don't receive any feedback from them. What would I specifically suggest to fix this? Well, first off, if the leads are truly qualified leads, they tend to follow up. They just don't like doing the paperwork and letting you know about it. So one way is to make the paperwork really easy or go into or incentivize them for doing the paperwork and the follow-up. But really the underlying trick to getting follow-up from distributors is making sure that those leads are really well qualified as being sales-ready opportunities, and they will make the time to follow them up. But if they've followed up 10 of them and none of them are any good and nobody returns their calls, they assume all the leads are bad. So you really have to make sure that you're giving them what are truly good qualified leads if you want them to follow up. Then you need to make the paperwork as easy as possible. And Rafael, I'm going to dismiss your question so that you can ask another one when you're ready. So let's move on with this nurturing for a moment. So we want to get those 3 out of 4 sales, and why am I saying that? Well, this graph is a compilation of results from various clients of mine, as well as some publishing companies and ad agencies, and I've sort of put it all together. And what it's really telling us is that 1 out of 4 sales happen within the first 6 months or so, ranging between 23 and 27% across all those companies that I've worked with in the last few years. Another 15 to almost 20% buy within 6 months to a year later, meaning they're not sales ready yet, but they will be. Fully half, and again, forgive my bad graphics here with my mouse, but fully half don't buy till after a year, and a full quarter, full 25% buy 18 months to indefinitely longer. So even a year and a half later, a quarter of the sales still have not happened yet. So that's why we need to nurture our leads. And although we may do another seminar on that subject in depth, let me suggest that that's one of the reasons you need to get these prospects on a database and reach out and touch them on an ongoing basis with your direct marketing to stay inside and in mind and nurture them along until they are sales ready. Why? Because that's where 3 out of 4 sales are. That's where you can increase the throughput of your lead generation by 300% or more, by basically discovering those leads that are, as they become ripe, instead of just cherry picking the ripe ones now and leaving the rest to either wither on the vine or, for your competition coming in and eat your lunch, so to speak. So let's move on. Always be asking for referrals. That's tip number 19. I think that, our customers are happy, and our suppliers and our influencers are happy to give us referrals. We just have to remind them that we're always looking for referrals. For example, in the subject, in the signature line of my emails, on a fairly regular basis, I use a PS, referrals are always appreciated. And I've noticed that when I start doing that, everybody who's getting my emails may notice that, and suddenly my referrals go up. It's just one little technique of many, but I'm constantly trying to let my customers know that if they know of somebody else that might be a good fit for my services, I sure would appreciate it if they'd mention me. And also I do that with industry influencers, the folks that have the ear of my prospective customers, as well as my networking contacts, people that are personal friends and business associates that I know either locally or through an association. I'm constantly, in a very polite way, but letting them know that referrals are appreciated and rewarded in many cases. So tip number 19 was always be asking for referrals. We could probably come up with 100 more tips, but I promise you that if you implement even half of those tips we just discussed, the number of sales-ready leads that your company is generating will go up proportionally 2-3 times more. And where the Direct Marketing Association, for example, says that average response rates to direct mail is now 1%, my clients that are using multiple offers to the right list with frequency of mailing are seeing 3, 4, 5% responses. And if you cumulatively add it up, let's say it's a 3% response every month. Over a year, that's 36% response across their list versus 3% a month if they did something just once. So definitely give that some thought. So let's talk about how you get started. And for many of us, we already have some programs in place, but sales may be clamoring that they need some leads right now, either to finish the year with a bang or to start the new year with a bang. And so what are some things we could do today? Well, the top 5 to-dos, I think, are crank up your laser printer and get out a lead generation letter this week. I was involved with a client that was trying to do a fancy mailer recently, and with all the back and forth and approval process, it took 8 weeks from the first draft till it finally was ready to go in the mail. Meanwhile, you could sit down and write a professional letter, crank up your laser printer, and have it in the mail today if you wanted to. You might build an extra day in for having somebody proofread it. And by the way, a great source for that is a company called proofreadnow.com, proofreadnow.com. com. You might want to make a note of that. But you can get it out today. And when I started my business a number of years ago, the first week, I didn't wait until I had the perfect database and everything ready to go. I sent out a letter to the dozen or so influencers and prospective customers I already had access to. You know, a month later, I had a few hundred names, and I mailed to them and telemarketed to them and started some of my other marketing activities. And a year later, I had, 10,000 names on my database. But I didn't wait until it was all ready to go. I got something out the door today, and I recommend you do the same thing. 2 is send a letter to customers asking for referrals. Be formal about it. One little tip is to say, we're in order to provide the same kind of great service that we've given you on an ongoing basis, we need to grow a little bit, and we're looking for one more client. Now, you might be asking 20 clients for one more client, but if it sounds like you're trying to grow too quickly, some clients don't want to help that happen because they're afraid their own service will take a hit because you'll be too busy with your new customers. So I found that technique of saying we're looking for one new client or a couple new clients works really well, and you might want to give that a try. Let's move on. By the way, when you send that letter to customers, make sure it's hand-signed, and also tuck a few extra business cards in it and suggest to them that they put them in their desk drawer or their briefcase so that they'll have them handy to hand out to somebody if they run into somebody who might be a good referral for you. 3 is now it's time to go back and start building a targeted database of prospects. If I look at the number one thing that's generating leads and sales for my clients, it is database-driven direct marketing, be that mail, email, or phone, or any combination of the above. That is working better for my clients than any other thing they're doing in their marketing. And whether they're using that direct mailing or email to promote a seminar or get people to download a white paper or drive them to their website, doesn't matter. It is a very effective tool. It's like fishing in a barrel full of fish. You're talking to the right folks. So one of the priorities is to start working on cleaning up and building out your list. And we may do another full seminar webinar on that in the future, but I think you have an idea of what you need to do to get started. So get started. Quit making excuses about how bad your list is, and instead start taking some steps to clean it up. And 4th is start building a suite of offers. Now, whether you're repurposing older materials or you're taking the best articles out of past issues of your newsletter and creating them as the 7 most read articles, as a package, or whether you're borrowing information from your suppliers and principals. So, for example, if you're a software reseller and you're selling Microsoft and or Cisco systems kind of software and hardware, there's often white papers and case studies on their websites that you can leverage as an offer to make in your mailings. So think about what things would be appropriate to people at different stages of their consideration process and start putting those offers together because they're really key to getting more response and more people to start the sales process with you. And number 5, and perhaps as important as any of the other 4, is update your website's homepage. In other words, make sure that when they get your mailer or get the phone call or are referred to you and they go to your webpage, it doesn't scare them away. It tells them clearly, you've come to the right place. If you're looking for this kind of service or product, you've come to the right place, and we're here to help. I think so many websites these days were put up 5 or 6 years ago, and not much has been done to them since. And those same companies complain, well, the reason I haven't done anything is my website doesn't give me any leads. Duh. That's why it doesn't give you any leads, is because your website is out of date and not very effective. So it's time to go back and work on your website because it's often the first step in any consideration process. I get your mailer, I check out your website before I inquire. I hear about you over lunch with a friend, I check out your website before I inquire. I get an email from you, I click through to check your website before I inquire. So definitely make sure you update your website, at least the home page, and then start working on making it better overall. Well, I promised you some resources, and then we're going to open up the phones in a few minutes for Q&A verbally. But if anyone has any chat questions, you want to use that Q&A tab at the top and ask some chat questions, please do. Let me talk about some resources. One is an article I just wrote called Getting It Done, and it's 12 shortcuts to getting your marketing done, and it includes some tips to getting it out the door, but it also includes a lot of resources and URLs and links to places where you can get help, whether that be a contractor, an outsourcer, an intern, a temp. I've identified a lot of sources for those. So help yourself to that article, and it'll be, I think, really helpful to you. Also, subscribe to my newsletter, Sales Lead Report, every month or so. I don't get it out every month. I aim for once a month, but I probably get it out significantly less than that. But if I aim for 6 times a year, guess what? I probably only get it out once or twice. So I still aim for once a month. It is free, and it's loaded with tips and ideas to help you get the job done right. And then last but not least is I have a blog, which is more of an opinion piece. And the blog is where I will take on either topical things in the news or a subject that I feel needs to be addressed, and I will rant and rave about it a little bit or share some links to it. So check out the blog as well. Hi, who's on the line?
Okay. Hi, Mac. It's Angie Harada from Maximizer Software. I'm here with a couple people on the team.
Hello, Angie. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. What can I do for you?
Just a quick question. I thought it was interesting, your comment on having multiple calls to action. We have found that sometimes when there are a couple of different options, that it can be confusing for people and they end up not doing any of the actions. Because we tried it in our recent campaign, and we're actually moving back to try to simplify a little bit with only 2 calls to action rather than, let's say, 4. Any thoughts on how to kind of draw that line, or how to simplify it, how to clarify it when you do have multiple options?
I typically shoot for an early option, a middle option, and a late option in their buying process. Sort of ask for the information, come to the webinar, or talk to our salesperson. And they're often 3 different strengths of the same offer. Get a white paper on the subject, or attend a webinar on this subject, or have a conversation with our expert on this subject. So it's really the same offer in 3 different strengths or ease of taking advantage of it. And I find that when my clients are doing that, they get the most response of it. But when they've got 20 options and they are all unrelated options, I think sometimes the prospective customers get into a gridlock situation. They're not sure what to do, so they don't do anything. You're right about that.
That makes sense. Okay, thanks.
Well, thanks for your call.
If anyone else has a question, all they have to do is press *8, and we'll move you up to talk to Mac.
Well, I appreciate it. I have another question here about my recommendation on mailings or reaching out and touching people monthly. What is the frequency that's best? Well, I would suggest that to some degree it depends on the media you're using to contact them. For example, if you call me every week, I would tell you to stop calling me, and if I need you, I'll call you. If you email me weekly, unless it's really useful, compelling information, that may be too often. I will either ask you to opt me out, or worse yet, I will add you to my junk filter, and you think your emails are getting through to me, but they no longer are. They're going right to the junk box, which I almost never check. But if you're reaching out to me, let's say once a month by email, much less likely that I'll opt out. It's easier to just let them keep coming and hit delete if I'm not interested at the moment than it is to go through the extra trouble of opting out or putting you on my junk filter. That said, now if you're announcing a webinar or something, you might do a reminder 3 weeks in advance and then a reminder 1 week in advance and a day before. But if you do that to me every single week, every single month of the year, I will start opting out. One of my clients in New York City started a series of weekly seminars. So basically, everybody was getting approximately 3 emails a week about their seminars, one for this week's, one for next week's, one for the week after, and they started opting out left and right because it was just too much too often, and they weren't all relevant to those prospects' interests. So I'd say about once a month. By phone, it might be, if there's a reason to call them back next week because they asked you to or you agreed to that, by all means. But otherwise, by phone, I found it's about the question is, would it be okay to call you back in a couple of months? And almost always the answer to that is yes. Whereas if I say, would it be okay to call you back in a couple of weeks, frequently the answer is, no, if I need anything, I'll call you, and they just close the door on your phone calls. So I find that the media dictates the frequency, but about once a month is often a good frequency. And I'd rather see you do a minimum of once a quarter, because if you don't talk to your prospects at least once a quarter, you're probably out of sight and out of mind. So is there any other questions from, Fernanda or James or Kim or Luciano or Sal or Mahedran or Roberts? I'd sure love to hear them. And we'll take another couple of minutes for questions, and then we'll wrap up promptly at the top of the hour. Any others in the queue?
We have a couple more.
Great.
Let me move this one up. This is from Vancouver, BC.
Great. Hello again.
Hi, Mac. It's Angie from Vancouver in Maximizer again.
Great, Angie. How can I help you this time?
Just one of your thoughts on, I know one of the things that you talked about and one of the things we're actually working on that's on our radar right now is a bit of a resource checklist or evaluation kit of some sort to help our prospects, evaluate different vendors in our space. So one of the comments that we've kind of heard and we're trying to think about right now is obviously a vendor providing something is going to be skewed towards a checklist on the strength the vendor already has. So is it better to provide a evaluation resource guide or checklist of some sort that's built by a third party as opposed to built by the vendor?
The easy answer is that if it's built by a third party, they trust it a little bit more, but both work. So it becomes an economic decision. Is there an affordable third party that you can leverage that additional credibility? And by the way, when they do the checklist, it still favors your product or service or solution. That's the holy grail. But the next best thing is to do your own of here are the top questions you should be, asking. And I think they expect that there'll be a little bit of salesy effort in there, or that some of the points that you're recommending are important, may favor your solution or product or service. But I think that they also feel that if it's titled properly, that it's still a useful tool to help them consider those decisions, even if they're taking it with a grain of salt.
Okay, great.
Thanks for that question, Angie.
I actually have another one. Someone else on my team here, Mac.
Okay, one more, and then I'll take the other call.
Okay.
This is Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Hi. Quick couple of questions. You said to avoid cliches, obviously, and I find those very irritating in marketing copy. But what about for EDMs and direct mail? How about a sort of a play on words or using phrases that generally apply to something else, but you use them in a unique or different context? What do you think of that sort of?
Well, I'm not saying don't be creative. I believe creativity sometimes helps you break through the clutter. But I'm saying don't be too clever where they don't get it. If somebody says, "Huh? I don't get it," you've got a problem. And often we get it because we came up with the idea. So we definitely, if we're getting clever, need to show it to others and see if they get it. My wife is an interesting person to test when I do that, because if you can imagine, she's an attorney and she has an economics degree, so she's a finance and attorney person. I call her lovingly the Department of No. Isn't it attorneys and accountants who always say no when you ask them to approve something? But she looks at the world differently than I do because of her training and her vocation. And it's always interesting to have her read something and say, "I don't get it." And that might be a problem for me. If she doesn't get it, are other business people going to get it who aren't marketers, who don't know all the buzzwords, or aren't insiders? And for example, in the software industry, frequently we're using industry terms like front office, back office that us software people really understand. But meanwhile, Mr. Joe Manufacturing Company doesn't have a clue what those words mean because they don't use those words in their business. So just be careful about creativity and buzzwords and borrowed interest. It can be done, but you need to be careful that you're not obscuring the real message.
Great advice. Thanks.
Thank you for the questions. And you had another call queued up, Sherry.
I do. It is from Hanover, New Hampshire. I'm going to move that one up.
Hello, Hanover, New Hampshire.
Hello, Mac. This is Raphael.
Hello, Raphael.
Thank you for answering my question before. Appreciate it.
No problem. How can I help you?
Well, I have a couple of questions. We sell in Latin America. This is the region we manage. Actually, we should have Fernanda in Brazil participating in this webinar, which is something interesting for us.
Okay.
And we participate in a lot of trade shows in the region. That's a big investment for our company. Could you share with us any best practices as far as how to better qualify visitors at a trade show? We seem to always ask the traditional demographic questions, some questions related to our products, and then we close with, when will you be buying or purchasing, and then that becomes our hot lead qualifier question. So that's question number one. Any best practices you can share with us for trade shows, lead management. The second question is in regards to a little bit linked to my previous written question on channel partners. I appreciate and agree with you that we have to improve our qualification process, but could you also share any successful stories you have put together in practice to incentivize your channel partners to give you information back regarding the leads that you provided to them?
Those are both absolutely great questions, so let's take them one at a time. The trade show lead qualification, first off, I'll answer it, but I'll also suggest that I've got 5 or 6 articles on using trade shows and getting more out of trade shows on my website in that learning center. But in general, I think that the best way to qualify a lead at the show is to ask them an open-ended question about why they stopped at your booth or what brought them to the show today. And in the process of answering that, they will often give you a lot of the qualifying information you need to know that this is an opportunity worth either further discussing at the time or capturing as a lead to pass on to salespeople or channel partners. The other thing to ask is if they could describe their need for that product or service. In other words, do they have a current project or initiative or problem that they're looking to solve? And then to ask a follow-up question to that about what is their process for trying to solve that problem or pick the vendor. And if they've described to you that they have a problem or a need or that they have an active process in place to make a decision about that, they're a pretty qualified lead, regardless of some of the other more traditional criteria, meaning is it a big enough deal to pursue, how quickly will it happen. But generally, if they have a problem that your product or service addresses and they have a process in place to try to figure out how to solve that problem, you're golden. That's a good lead. The second question was about some case study or examples of incentivizing channel partners. There are a couple of ones that come to mind immediately. One is a mystery lead program, which means one of the leads in every sales territory or every distributor territory or rep territory is we have made a note randomly of which one it is. We picked one randomly and made a note of it. And if they follow up and report back on that lead, they instantly win something, whether that be a $100 gift certificate or a night at a hotel or it would have to be adjusted to the marketplace. For example, one of my clients gives away a free house cleaning or a free car detailing to their salespeople as one of those incentives, or a gift check worth an equal value. I think it was like $100, so they could pick which one they wanted. The other client gives points for return leads, and they actually have. I've seen 2 versions of this. One version is where if you report back on a lead before the sale closes, you get a higher commission rate. As long as you've closed the loop that you have been following up that lead, then we will give you a higher commission rate on that lead. Now, you may or may not be in a position to do that, so the option to that is they get so many points for every lead followed up on and registered, and they get so many points for every closed sale that they inform you about, and then they can use those points to order merchandise out of the catalog, coats, briefcases, desk accessories, clocks. In other words, branded or logoed merchandise in many cases, but things that they wouldn't get otherwise, or an MP3 player, or an iPod, or a smartphone, or whatever you want those incentives to be that would cause them to spend extra time. Some big incentives at the moment are MP3 players or digital cameras. Digital picture frames are big at the moment because not everybody has one yet. Those kinds of things can be something that somebody would do a little extra work to try to get a chance to earn enough points to get for free. So hopefully those were helpful. Well, with that and being respectful of your time, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And please let me know of your successes and keep in touch, and I will make a point of letting you know about upcoming events. From Mac McIntosh here in North Kingstown, Rhode Island, I'll say thank you and goodbye.